Um, so with that being said, I'm going to try to do pretty efficiently here, but walk through a basic installation of what WordPress takes to install when you have cPanel hosting. Most hosts that you will buy website hosting from today will offer that. So if you're looking at a package, as long as they have cPanel, it makes it pretty easy to install and use WordPress. So that's what we're going to walk through here next, just to give you a really high level view of how that works. So if you see here, if you were to sign up for a hosting account and there was nothing there, you'd either get a default page that says this is a default hosting page for HostGator or GoDaddy or whatever it is, or you're just going to get a blank page like this that just says, here's this URL, there is nothing here. And some of you may have, if you've interacted with developers or done anything, you may have, this may be familiar ground. Again, we'll be covering this really in detail in the future. But to just do a quick run through, you get a publicly accessible web folder out on the internet that just shows up like this. There's nothing there. WordPress is very quick and simple to install. So you go to your hosting control panel, log in, and then with cPanel, we get to see this whole control panel of options we have for hosting. The next step to installing WordPress is that we're going to open File Manager, because that allows us to put files, interact on that publicly accessible web folder. And you can see now I've got a browser here where I can navigate and choose where I want to do things. Public HTML, or sometimes called HTT docs. It kind of depends which hosting you're company with, but the publicly accessible folder is where we want to put everything for WordPress. To install WordPress, to get the files for it, all you have to do is go to wordpress.org, and it's always linked to right here on the front page. It's a very small zip file, and it doesn't take long to download no matter what speed you're on. It's only 3.5 megabytes now. They really focus on keeping it lean and fast. So we've downloaded the file that contains all the framework files and everything we need to begin to set up this WordPress installation. We're going to upload that zip file using the cPanel here, which is generally the fastest way. Even if you have straight FTP access, I typically find this to be the quickest way to get it done. So we upload that file. Then in this file manager here that shows us again what is inside of the public HTML folder that's going to be web accessible, we see this archived folder here. And it has everything inside of it for the WordPress installation. We're just going to extract that. It's just like when you receive a zip file for something from work or whatever it might be, and you extract it in your desktop. We're doing the same thing on the web server. The web server is similar in a lot of ways to your desktop computer. So we now have the expanded version of this, and so that contains everything. And there's actually two versions here. There's still the compressed version. So we're going to get rid of the compressed version because it unarchived and made a copy of everything. I open up the folder that we just unarchived, and here we see all the components and all the files that make up the framework of WordPress. And again, we'll get into these in more technical detail in the future, but this is a listing of all the different pieces that make up WordPress. I want to install WordPress in my root directory of public HTML. Again, pretty technical. We'll cover this in more detail in the future, but in order to do that, I have to make sure that all these files sit directly in the public HTML folder and not in this subdirectory WordPress. So I've moved them all to the folder that I want, just like drag and drop on your desktop. And then I'm going to get rid of that empty WordPress folder. Now, with a content management system, which we're going to talk about in a little more depth here shortly, there's two components to it. There's a front side that is displays the information that you put into it and how that you control it, and then there's a back side that is the database. And the easiest way that I have been able to, explain that in the past is to kind of say that your database is like a file cabinet in your office, and it contains all the information that you want to display on the front side. So I'm going to pull up a diagram that shows you guys exactly what I'm just talking about here. And that will kind of be relevant to what we're going to do next, because so far all we've done is upload and archive, unarchive all those files, and move all those files into the publicly accessible part of the website. And I have a link here. I'm gonna Okay. This will graphically explain a little bit better what's occurring on a content management system. So when you look at a website, blow this up a little bit, there are the visual components that you see and that you interact with, and there are code elements of HTML, PHP, different code languages that represent that graphical information. On a dynamic site like a WordPress, what happens is this file cabinet of information is represented to the visual areas that you see on the site. And with that, what you'll see is that each different area on the page that we visually see is related to some information back in this file cabinet. And that's kind of how the database interacts with the files and framework that we see that we just uploaded. So the next step that I'm going to do in this installation is setting up this database. The other thing that's worth noting is a lot of your hosting companies will do all this work that I'm doing manually right now with an automated script. But I want you guys to understand technically what's going on so that when you do use a tool like that, you'll understand what's actually going on. So what I'm doing now is using a database wizard to create a username, a database, and a password that will allow WordPress to access this data, this information here. So we'll get that out of the way, and this will move a little bit quicker, but I wanted to do kind of a high level of how this is installed, what happens, so at least you conceptually understand what's going on here. And what I'm doing is just copying and making note of that information that I just created, because I want the username and passwords for this type of thing, for this database, to be very random and very secure. You don't ever want to set up a database with a simple password, because it means that a bot that trolls sites like this, or anybody could get in and hack into your site and alter the content and break your site. So it's important to use unique and unrecognizable information for this step. So now we've set up the database, and which is going to house all this information. We've uploaded the raw files that are going to represent the information in our database, and now we just need to tie it all together. When you do that and you go to your site for the first time after uploading those files, WordPress is very intelligent and says, hey, there's no configuration settings, and so we need to enter those. So the process is pretty straightforward. Inputting in username and password and the database that we created. And you're never going to use this username again in most cases, or the password again in most cases, or any of this information. So it's good that it's random information, and you don't typically change these last two boxes. We just leave them as the default settings. And if you're following along in the written information, we're still I've inserted this ahead of the first piece here because I realized I wanted to at least give you guys a high level, review here so that some of these other things tie together. And then when we come back again in the future in more detail, um, it will make sense for you. So I'm just going to title this my example installation, and I can choose my username that I want to use. I like to use a longer username. Sometimes I'll use administrator, sometimes I'll use my name, whatever it might be. It's a good idea to do something longer than just admin. Everybody's probably been hearing about things that have been hacked. Like Fox News's Twitter account was hacked the other day, and we hear about MasterCard being taken down, and we hear about all these security breaches that happen. Honestly, a lot of those could be avoided if people used longer usernames and more secure passwords. So it's a good idea to use something like a password generator and tools like that in order just to give you more security. So in this final part of the installation wizard here, you get to pick your site title. So we're going to call this, we'll call it John's Auto. And my username, I put a generated password in there that I have a tool that helps me save that. And then your email address. In most cases, if you're putting this site up live and you're getting ready to promote it, go ahead and leave this checkbox down here that says this tool actually promotes your site to Google, Technorati, and blog engines like that as soon as you create it. Since we're doing development work and we're not going to share this and it's not actually a real sales site, or in the case that you want to do all the work and then publicize it, again, that'd be the same thing where you can keep it a little more private before you kind of release it and publicize it to Google. So after that, it says, okay, everything's successful. And we're gonna, again, you'll see me using quite a bit here, something called LastPass. And it's a great plugin. It works on phones. It's a great thing to keep secure passwords with. Just a little side note. So now that I've completed the installation, this is the login view. And you'll see here is the dashboard of all the controls. So that was a pretty brief, high level, here's how it gets installed. But in the future, you'll be able to obviously watch this video. If you watch other things on YouTube or read other things, it'll make a little more sense about what's going on in that initial installation.